We're attempting to build an absolutely wild drift car mounting this Lamborghini Diablo kit car body onto a BMW E36 chassis. And not just any BMW E36 chassis, probably the dirtiest one I've ever seen. And in the last video, we cut up the BMW E36 till there was almost nothing left. And sat the shell on the chassis for the first time. And we confirmed surprisingly that it actually does fit, although we have some major challenges on our hands. One of the biggest things being the firewall is so far back from where it needs to be. Luckily, with a custom firewall, we will be able to fix that problem. If you haven't seen the first video, jump back and watch it. We had an absolute blast cutting up the E36. But I did see a bunch of you guys in the comments suggesting things, so I wanted to address a couple of those. A lot of you guys said, why don't we build a fully custom space frame chassis for this thing? The really basic answer to that is they are illegal on track here in Australia. No one insures them. So if we did that, we wouldn't actually be able to drive this thing on the track, believe it or not. The chassis has to be a pre-existing chassis built by a manufacturer if you want to actually take the car onto the track. The other reason is I simply love the BMW E36 chassis. It's a great drift car, and I really want this car to have good drifting characteristics. I don't want it to be a struggle when I take it on track to kind of figure it out and get it drifting for the first time. The second big question you guys had was what motor we were going to use, are we going to rear mount the motor, etc, etc. Well, we're definitely front mounting the motor, and we are using a 13B turbo rotary engine in this thing. There's plenty of room in the front, or the front trunk here, for a 13B turbo motor. Again, I know a bunch of you guys said we should put a motor in the back, but I really want to build something completely different with this car, and also having the motor in the front, again, for the balance characteristics when you're drifting. I would much rather have a motor in the front rather than in the back, because you basically get like a pendulum effect when you're drifting, when you have a whole bunch of weight over the back. So trying to distribute the weight evenly in this car is going to be really important to us. I hope that answers some of you guys' questions and comments, but now it's time to actually get into this video and the build. So whilst we have the shell sitting on the chassis, I really want to get it properly permanently mounted. And to do that, we've got to tackle a couple of things here. The shell is still fouling on the chassis, and as you can see here as well, our strut towers are going to start to become an issue. So the first thing we're going to do is pull the shell off the chassis, cut a couple more things out, lower the strut towers down, and get it to a point where we can put the shell back onto the chassis and actually weld in some mounting points so we can bolt it all together for the first time properly. Let's get this thing on the hoist, lift the shell up, and let's get to work on the chassis. So once again, the shell is in the air, and this is going to happen multiple times throughout this series, so get used to seeing this. But it's time to do some more cutting. And actually, while the camera was charging, because I'm a rookie and I completely forgot to charge it, I actually just cut out the A-pillar from the chassis. That was extremely hard, and I had to do something really dodgy to get it done. So this is my angle grinder, and I had to put this huge disc that we got from Bunnings onto the angle grinder just so I could get the length to cut in here, because like I just could not get in to the spaces I needed to get into. So I used a mix of that along with the reciprocating saw. Don't worry, I used big welding gloves and my face mask so that we were super safe, but I actually got it cut out. Here is our A-pillar here, and you can see there's just so much reinforcement in here, and that's why they're so difficult to cut out. But what we're gonna do right now is we'll cut this whole section out because it's actually not needed, and we're also gonna cut the strut tops, and we're gonna cut a section of metal out of it and see if we can just lower them and basically weld them back in place much lower. With any project like this, it's always a bit of trial and error, so we'll give that a go. If that doesn't work, we will get some custom laser cut plates to weld onto the top of our struts, but I'm just hoping that we can kind of retain the stock look and just cut and shut them a little bit lower. So fingers crossed, let's get to work. I cut out the last of the remaining metal that was stopping the shell from sitting nicely on the chassis. Then I marked out where we needed to cut the strut towers before using white tape as a guide while I'm cutting, as it's really easy to see. Once that was done, I undid the front top hat bolts and jacked the car up so the springs didn't have tension on them and the strut tops could come away cleanly once cut. Then it was finally time to get cutting. As they say, it's all in the prep. Once the first cut was complete, I repeat the same process to remove the middle section, and after a bit of massaging, we can weld the strut top back in place. And just like that, we have one side done. It took quite a while, but I am fairly happy with the results. I ended up using the stock top and then manipulating the metal around it and then pushing it up from the bottom and welding it on. There's still quite a bit more welding to be done there, but it's going to work. I was able to set the top backwards a little bit, which will give us more caster, which is what we want for the drift setup without having to push the front wheel forwards. Obviously, I've got to finish weld that, but for now, it's tacked in or more than tacked in enough so that we can go ahead, do the other side, and then lower the shell back onto the chassis. And of course, as always, let's do the YouTube magic on this side to get it done so we can put the shell back down. 3, 2, 1. Look at that. Both strut tops cut and shut. And now we can go ahead and throw the suspension back on and lower the shell down onto the chassis, and hopefully it's sitting at a much better height. Like I said before, we will make those strut tops look a lot prettier when we go ahead and do all of the chassis fab. So after a bit of shimmying, we have some success. All that hard work has definitely paid off. The shell is now sitting much lower on the chassis, which is exactly what we were going for. As you can see now, the A-pillar is still on this side and it's like halfway up the door. The steering wheel is also basically touching the roof, so that tells us that the shell is now sitting quite a bit lower, and there's still a little bit more that we can get out of it. But man, even just having it sitting lower like that just looks so much better. Now there's one thing I'm sure a bunch of you guys are yelling at your TV screens watching this, kind of frustrated with, and that is the fact that we haven't even cleaned this car. It's so freaking dirty on the inside of the engine bay and underneath, and it's starting to get to me. So I'm gonna wrap up for the night right here, but we're gonna come straight back in the morning, and the first thing we're gonna do is give this thing a bath. Get rid of all this dirt and make it a much nicer area to work on. So I'll see you guys bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning. Bye. So it is the following day, we are back, and I've had a surprise visitor. My good friend Rex H is here.
Hello, what's up guys?
What do you think of the Scambo?
Bro, this thing in real life is insane. Like, it's so big. Like, people don't really understand what this is like in person, like, until they see it. So
it's
yeah,
huge,
come down to
eh?
the next meet.
Look at that, dude. But I've managed to swindle you into helping me clean this thing up.
Yeah, man, we're gonna clean this thing up, this chopped up chassis.
How good?
What's this, man?
Yeah, how good? What is it? Cut and shut strut tops. Yeah. Absolutely stoked. So we're gonna swing this thing outside. We just went down to Autobahn and filmed some fun stuff.
Yep, shout out Autobahn.
Hell yeah, and now we're gonna degrease the hell out of this thing. Of course, because Rex is a guest in my shop, I'm gonna make him do all of the hard work. Here you go, sir. You can do the honors.
Hell yeah, let's do it.
Coat the whole thing. Everything.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Come on, face. Oh.
Sorry about that. It's only E36 gunk, which is probably worse than AIDS. Disgusting, bro. Oh my god.
That looks sick.
That's way better.
Brand new, man.
Better. I want to see what the dirt patch looks like underneath the car. That's insane. And that's still like only half of what's actually under there.
What do you reckon? Minus 10 kilos?
Exactly. And then there's probably another 10 kilos of dirt on the floor in the shop over there. All right, we're ready to throw the shell onto the car, but Rex has to go. He's got his own projects to do.
Yeah, but I'm keen to see this done, man. I have no doubts because of that thing over there.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, this is gonna be, bolted up tonight, hopefully.
Yeah. We're gonna bolt it up now, and then we're gonna throw all the wheels and stuff on. I'm friggin' pumped, but thanks for coming to do the dirty work.
No worries, man. No worries.
So good.
Anytime.
If you haven't already, clearly go check out Rex's channel. Links in the description. But Rex just bought a Lancer, and he's doing the turbo conversion.
That's it, following in Mike Lake's footsteps, and gonna turbo the Lancer.
I'm definitely featuring in those videos because that's my bread and butter, but appreciate you. All right, let's get the shell on the car. So I've got the shell set down back on the chassis, and we are finally ready to mount this thing permanently, kind of permanently. And I'm going to keep this super simple for the way that we're gonna do it. I've actually already tested my theory on this side, but I'll walk you guys through how we do it on this side of the chassis. So here's our mount right here. That is glassed into our fiberglass shell. There's a metal frame going through the shell. That's a part of the metal frame, and this is how we're gonna mount the shell to the chassis. 1 point here, 1 point here, 2 points at the rear, and a whole bunch of other points throughout the car as we continue to fabricate the chassis and create mounting points. So for the past couple of hours, I've literally been measuring and shifting the shell to get it into the absolute perfect position, because we cannot muck this up, otherwise it's gonna look really weird. So we're keeping it really simple for mounting the shell, and we're literally using some box tube that I've cut to an angle that is perfect for this mount. And I've welded in 4 captive nuts here. That means that once we weld this to the chassis, we can then bolt this plate to this, and it's a really simple process. If we ever want to remove the shell, we simply unbolt those 4 bolts on each side, and the shell will lift off the chassis. That is the theory anyway. I'm sure there's a million ways you could do this. This is the way that I'm choosing. There's no real rule book with something like this. It just has to be super strong. So let's go ahead and weld this to the chassis so we can bolt the shell down.
Off camera, I've measured about 1,000,000 times to make sure the shell is centered and in the best possible position. Once our mount's in place, it's time to lay down some welds. Fingers crossed everything is where it needs to be.
And just like that, our shell is now officially mounted at the front. So here's the left side mount, and here's the right side mount. It's so simple, literally just bolts in 4 points on each side. Everything's kind of just tacked in place at the moment. Obviously we'll final weld it when we're doing all the fab work on the chassis. I'll box all these in as well and make it all super nice and pretty, but for now, very happy with that, and it's time to move down the back. So down the back end here, we have the metal that runs through the shell up here. It's currently covered in fiberglass, but what we'll do is we'll flappy disc some of this fiberglass off and expose the bare metal. And then we're gonna weld a plate on here, and similar to the front end, we'll have some box section with captive nuts welded in. So basically the plate that's welded to the frame can bolt to the box tube that's got the captive nuts in it and welded to the chassis. One thing I almost made a mistake with, I was about to do the rear mounts. The front of the car has the chop springs and the rear of the car has completely stock springs. So it's slanting forwards right now, but I had the shell sitting all the way down at the back, because if I had welded the mounts in place as it was, and then we lowered the car, the shell would have basically been sitting on the ground at the back. Luckily, I noticed that before we made the mounts. I've simply raised the back of the shell now in line with where the front of the shell is sitting. So when we lower the rear and lower the front a little bit more, the sides will be sitting nice and even. Whew, lucky I had my coffee this morning. But let's go ahead and make these rear mounts. Then our shell will be properly mounted and we can move on to the suspension.
Removing the fiberglass to expose the metal frame was way harder than I expected, as the fiberglass is really thick, which I guess is a good thing. I'm using the 6mm thick L bracket to weld to the frame. This should be more than strong enough to do the job. Once that's welded on, I measure and cut the box section that will weld to the chassis, along with this metal base plate to reinforce the whole section, as the metal we're welding to is actually really thin.
So the first of our rear mounts is done, and I've got to say, this is a really enjoyable process. It definitely takes me back to the days of building the rear-wheel drive Evo, with the amount of measuring and the amount of freaking brain power that you have to use to get all of this right. But this is our first mount. Not completely done, because we still have to weld around the backside, but I'm really glad that we ended up plating the body, because even here, like, there's a slight hole because it's actually quite thin. So that plate obviously adds a whole bunch of reinforcement, but that's solid now. The body's actually mounted to the chassis nicely there. So we have 3/4 of the job done. One more to go. Of course, it's going to be exactly the same as this side, so I'm going to use a little bit of YouTube magic to get the last of this job done. Boom. And we are officially mounted in all 4 corners. How freaking good. So on this side, I actually ended up just using L bracket down here and L bracket up here. They're really, really thick steel L brackets, so they're very strong. Captive nuts on the back of this one, bolted together, and now, like, the body, even just with the 4 mounting points, it's like sturdy. It's crazy how sturdy it is just from that. Remember, this build is in its early stages, so these mounting points are just the start. We're obviously going to mount the body in a lot more places and reinforce it a bunch more, but the first thing we needed to do, of course, was get the body straight. And I'm over the moon with the fact that we've actually got that done. That's a huge part of this project done. Like, now this is actually one car, not two separate pieces. They're bolted together and we can move forward. Those mounts took an incredible amount of work and time, but man, look at that. So let's get this thing in the air now, and let's put some coilovers and arms in it and see if we can get these wheels fitting properly on the body.
We're using these budget coilovers and arms to dummy fit into our car along with these borrowed wheels, so we can make sure everything fits and do the necessary modifications before we commit to the expensive stuff.
So this is the first time we're taking a look at the underside of this E36 BMW. Of course we gave it a clean earlier, but this thing's still pretty darn dirty, and as you can see over here, we're still getting a lot of dirt falling out of this thing. But it is a very clean chassis, as in there's no rust, no dents or anything like that. The chassis rails are all nice and straight, so that is fantastic. But now it's time to tackle the next challenge on the list with this build. Obviously the focus of today is to get this thing sitting and looking exactly how we want, and making sure that we can get this as low as we possibly can with beautiful fitment. Clearly this is not beautiful fitment, and we need to figure out how we can get the wheels sitting from here all the way out to here in the rear guards. And the way that we do this is by using extended arms, and you can get it sitting out further a couple of different ways. So if you make these arms longer here, that will push the knuckle out that way and effectively have the wheel sit out further. You can also obviously use a wheel spacer as well. That is one of these things. You bolt it to the hub, and basically it has your wheels sit out further based on how thick the actual spacer is. We are going to be using a combination of both of those things to get the fitment that we want. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove all of the front suspension parts, and we're going to do that right now. There we go. So I finally have one side of the front suspension disassembled, and I can tell you that is always a difficult time when you've got a vehicle that's been sitting for a long time. In an environment like a farm, everything is just so stubborn when you pull it apart. So this is our old lower control arm, and this is our new lower control arm. So we make these here at Two Step Garage. I developed these with Nathan Makovic, and this is one way that we're gonna get the wider track width for our wheel to sit further out into the guard. So this is 60 millimeters extended from stock. That means if I put this here, the stock pickup point is here, and this, look how much wider that is. So that means we're gonna get that much more width simply by installing this lower control arm into the car, which is exactly what we're gonna do right now. Now that we have the LCA in, next up we need to throw our coilovers in. Now, like I said earlier, we're using these as our dummy coilovers. And because we've lowered the strut towers, we need the coilovers to be really small. So what I went ahead and did was I actually chopped this coilover right down, and I've wound it all the way in to get it maximum low. I'm not sure if this is gonna get us low enough, but it's a good test. So we're gonna go ahead, throw this in, and then we should almost be able to throw a wheel on the front of the car. So here is our stock janky side, and this is our aftermarket side. Look at that. So much neater and nicer. And look how much wider it is. Jeez, that's crazy. So this looks like it's sitting in a much better spot, but we're not gonna know until we fit up a wheel. So I have both sides of the suspension done on the car now, and as it always happens with cars, that took so much longer than expected. But there's one thing I completely forgot to show you guys that I installed in the car, and that is these lock adapters right here that we make at Two Step Garage. They're beautiful billet aluminium piece, and they benefit us a lot with the install because, as you can see when you install these, they bolt to the LCA here and the tie rod here, and it actually pushes the hub out maybe another inch, which gives us more track width, and they give us a huge amount of lock when we drift. So we turn the wheel like that, you can see, look at how much freaking lock that is. Crazy. But the best thing about the fact that we've finished the front suspension is now we can throw the wheels on the front of the car. Don't you just love it when a plan comes together? I had a vision in mind when we started this, and I had no idea whether we could actually pull it off, but look at that. Like, the front fitment is so good. All I need to do is dial out a little bit of camber here, and we'll literally be on guard here with the tire, which is like absolutely bang on. That is freaking insane. Look at that, so good. Woo. So we're down the back, rear suspension, and basically what we're going to do here is we're going to remove this upper arm that usually holds a spring. That's going to be gone. We're going to add an adjustable arm there instead. And essentially we run an adjustable arm up top and down below so we can push the hub this way towards the body of the car.
Just like the front end, the rear suspension parts were really annoying to remove because they were covered in so much crap. And even after we cleaned the car, there was still an insane amount of dirt in there, so it felt damn good to have it all removed.
There's just constant dirt coming out of this car.
We're replacing the stock spring perch with this adjustable arm, and as you can see, the adjustable arm is significantly longer, meaning the hub should sit out quite a bit more. That's the theory anyways. Since we've removed the spring perch and there's nowhere to put a spring, we're installing true coilovers where the shock would normally be.
So we have the arms in, the coilover is in. I ended up just slotting this end of this arm out just to get a little bit more movement this way, but it's definitely quite a bit wider than it would be from stock. So the last thing we're going to throw on is our 40mm spacer. This converts a 5x120 stub pattern from the BMW to 5x114, which is a much more common stub pattern. We'll probably end up using bigger spacers than this, maybe 60mm. I did see someone comment in the last video, spacers, aren't they dangerous or whatever? Absolutely not. On the track, worldwide, drifters use spacers everywhere. I've seen 80mm spacers on drift cars. They're not unsafe if they're made well. These are custom made by Wheel Mods here in Australia. Billet aluminium, very strong. Of course not to be used on the road, but on the track, perfect for what we're looking for. But let's go ahead, throw these on. We're only gonna get one side of the back done today because I really wanna get this video out for you guys. And everything I've done on this car, I've just underestimated how long it freaking takes. So let's get this last little bit done and wheel the car outside. So the car's finally on the ground and rolling on all four wheels. And I'm so happy with the progress that we've made on this thing. The fitment up front is absolutely insane. And the height of this thing is absolutely perfect. I could not be happier. This should be the height that we are going to run it at, maybe slightly higher so we have a little more suspension travel. But just the fact that the front suspension is all in and it actually works is a huge milestone for this project. Now down the back, we still have quite a bit more work to do to get the rear fitment absolutely spot on. As you can see, it's still quite a ways in the guards. Of course, with a project like this, you're never gonna get everything right first time, and that's the whole point of dummying up everything, going through that trial and error process. And now that I've seen what we need to do, I have come up with a plan to get the fitment that we're looking for in the rear without using insanely huge spacers. Regardless, it's still really cool to see the whole car sitting at the height that it's actually going to be sitting at when we're drifting. I wish I could push the car outside, but unfortunately there's a massive storm outside at the moment and it's really windy, which is making even filming in here kind of difficult. But that is where we're gonna leave it in this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed all of the insane progress that we made. It's really starting to look like a car now, which is awesome. I'm crossing my fingers that next week we will have the engine and gearbox set up to hopefully test fit in the engine bay, but we're going to be moving full steam ahead with this build from here on out. I also want to thank you guys so much for all the support on this build. Everyone seems super keen on it, which is really awesome. Shout out to all the new subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, hit that button and hit the like button as well. It really helps push these videos out, and the more views we get, the more I can do on this build. But thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next video. I'm getting out of here because this freaking storm is getting crazy, but thank you guys. Peace. Bye. Look, it's actually sitting where it needs to sit. It rolls, it turns, and it looks awesome. Peace. Thanks, guys. Bye.